Growing up in Bentonville, Oregon, I had always been the cautious type. My parents drilled into me the importance of safety, stranger danger, and staying within familiar circles. But when Jenna, my classmate and one of my closest friends, invited me to my first ever sleepover at her house, the mixture of excitement and nerves was overwhelming. Jenna lived on Maple Ridge Drive, a quiet, tree-lined street that felt like it had stepped out of a picture postcard. Her home was a sprawling two-story with tall windows and a small backyard that met a patch of forest. It was perfect for a sleepover, or so I thought. Jenna's parents were out of town for the weekend, leaving her older brother Liam in charge. At 19, he had the kind of casual, aloof air that made him appear responsible, yet untouchable at the same time. That Friday, October 12, 2018, the leaves had turned vibrant shades of orange and red, and the crisp autumn air carried a faint chill that crept under my sleeves as I walked up the driveway. I clutched my backpack tightly, filled with pajamas, snacks, and the notebook where we planned our Halloween costumes. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and warm vanilla, a faint residue from candles Jenna's mom always lit. The living room was cozy, with a fireplace, a large area rug, and cushions scattered haphazardly. Jenna was already lounging on the floor with her laptop typing costume ideas. "You made it!" she squealed, bouncing up. Her excitement made me smile, but I couldn't shake the nervous flutter in my stomach. Liam glanced up briefly from his phone. "Don't stay up too late," he muttered, then vanished upstairs. Jenna rolled her eyes. "He's useless," she said, plopping down beside me. We spent the next hour brainstorming costumes, laughter echoing through the spacious house. I tried to calm the lingering unease that always followed me when I was away from my parents for the first time. Around 10:45 p.m., a knock at the front door broke the comfortable rhythm of our evening. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, but repeated and deliberate. My heart skipped a beat. "Who could that be?" Jenna whispered, crawling toward the door. I peered through the peephole and saw a woman standing in the drizzle, coat damp, clutching a small backpack. Her eyes darted past the windows, scanning the house with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "I just need to use your phone," she said, her voice calm but strained. My car broke down a few streets over. Jenna's hesitation mirrored my own panic. "Liam isn't home," she said weakly. I shook my head firmly. "No, we can't let her in," I said, my voice trembling. The woman's lips curved into a small, deliberate smirk. She pressed her hand against the door frame, lingering too long, and a gust of wind rattled the house. I felt my chest tighten. She turned slowly, her eyes still fixed on us, and began moving across the front yard. Her steps were deliberate, almost predatory, as though she knew the house better than we did. I pulled Jenna behind the couch, whispering, "She's watching us." Minutes passed in a tense, suffocating silence. Then the banging came, louder, insistent, echoing through the house. I grabbed my phone, shaking, and dialed 911. "There's a woman. She's trying to get in." My voice quivered, barely above a whisper. Outside, the shadow of her figure flitted past the window, moving with unnatural familiarity. Jenna and I ran upstairs to her room, locking the door and pressing our backs against it. From the safety of Jenna's bedroom, the house felt alien, transformed by tension and fear. Every creak of the wooden floors below made my stomach twist. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the distant howl of a dog sent shivers down my spine. We huddled under the blankets, whispering frantic theories about who she might be. "I don't get it," Jenna said, shaking. "Why would someone just stand there, watching us?" I swallowed hard. "People aren't always what they seem," I muttered. My heart pounded in rhythm with the persistent rain. I tried to remember all the warnings my parents had drilled into me. Never open the door for strangers. Always keep doors locked. Never trust appearances. But seeing someone actually outside your home, staring at you, made all those lessons frighteningly real. Minutes dragged into an eternity. Shadows outside shifted with the swaying branches, and every flash of lightning illuminated a figure on the lawn, only for it to vanish moments later. The phone line felt heavy in my hand as I whispered updates to the 911 operator. "She's moving. Closer to the backyard now," I said. Jenna whimpered. "Do you think she knows where we are?" I didn't want to answer. The thought of a stranger knowing the layout of the yard, moving with almost intentional precision, froze me in place. We clutched each other, hearts hammering, listening for the slightest sound. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the soft brush of clothing against the porch railing. Finally, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night. Patrol cars pulled up, lights cutting through the dark, wet yard. I peeked through the blinds and the woman was gone. Just gone. No footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing but the lingering sense of being watched. The officers were kind, but vague. "Sometimes people just vanish before we get to them," one said, giving us instructions for staying safe. I nodded, barely registering his words. We stayed in the bedroom the rest of the night, frozen at every small noise. The house transformed from familiar sanctuary into a cage of fear. In the weeks after that night, Willow Creek didn't feel the same. Every quiet street, every unfamiliar car idling nearby, made my heart race. Sleepovers became impossible. My parents didn't understand the lingering dread, but I couldn't shake it. My dreams were haunted by her smile, her deliberate movements, and the feeling of invisible eyes tracking me wherever I went. At school, I noticed small things. The way someone would linger a little too long near the locker room, the way shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally. I told myself it was paranoia, but the memory of that night clung to me like a second skin. Even Jenna, usually fearless, avoided sleepovers and stayed home for months, her own unease mirroring mine. Months later, I tried to understand what had happened. The police had no leads. Local neighbors mentioned seeing a woman wandering streets late at night, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. I realized that sometimes danger doesn't announce itself with violence. It whispers, lingers, and vanishes without a trace. I began journaling the experience, detailing every sound, movement, and sensation. It helped to process the trauma, but it also reminded me of the fragile boundary between safety and exposure. My parents reinforced boundaries, teaching me that vigilance wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Years have passed, but the lesson of that night remains etched into my memory. I learned that appearances can deceive, that vigilance can save lives, and that fear isn't weakness. It's a signal to act. Willow Creek returned to its peaceful rhythm, but the echo of that autumn night stays with me, shaping how I navigate the world. Now, I trust my instincts more than ever. I lock doors, I watch shadows, and I respect the quiet signs of danger. And though the woman at Willow Creek never reappeared, her visit taught me the value of caution, courage, and awareness. Sometimes the scariest lessons come not from what happens to us, but from what almost happens. Trust your instincts, respect the signals of danger, and understand that vigilance and caution are not fear. They are your first defense. I had always loved visiting my cousin Dylan's house in Pineview Heights, Madison, Wisconsin. Unlike my own home, where my parents hovered over every move I made, Dylan's house felt like a small world of freedom. He lived on Elmwood Court, a quiet suburban street where the neighbors were friendly but not intrusive. That Saturday, March 23, 2019, my parents had gone on a weekend trip to Chicago, leaving me to stay over at Dylan's house. He was 17, confident, and a bit mischievous, while I, at 12, was still learning to navigate moments without adults around. Dylan's parents were there, technically, but mostly occupied with his little sister Mia, who had just turned 4. That left Dylan and me largely to run the house, or so I thought. The evening started like any typical sleepover. We built a fort out of blankets in the living room, stacked pillows haphazardly, and snacked on chips and candy. Outside, the wind rustled through the small pine trees lining the driveway. The sky blushed in streaks of pink and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon, and for a while, the world felt calm and safe. We played card games, laughing over our ridiculous bets and silly dares. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have this time with Dylan, feeling like nothing could touch us in our little fort. But then, around 9:50 p.m., an unexpected knock at the door shattered the calm. Dylan froze mid-laugh. Who could that be? Mom said the neighbors aren't around tonight, he muttered. My stomach flipped as we crept toward the door. Peeking through the peephole, I saw two men in their late 20s. They wore jackets and caps and carried clipboards. At first they seemed official, but there was something about their posture, the way they shifted their weight nervously, that set off a warning in my mind. "Good evening," one said as Dylan opened the door just a crack. "We're from the city water department. We're checking on reported water pressure issues in the area. May we come in?" Dylan glanced at me nervously, then shook his head. "Sorry, we're busy tonight. You should check the next house." The men exchanged a brief look, unreadable, and then left without another word. Relief washed over me. We laughed uneasily, thinking it was just a harmless visit. But the feeling didn't last long. Sleepovers, I realized, had a way of turning ordinary nights into something far less ordinary. Around 1:15 a.m., I awoke to the faintest sound of footsteps in the living room. My eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds, and my heart stopped. Shadows moved near the family room window, fluid and deliberate. I nudged Dylan. "Wake up," I whispered urgently. His eyes fluttered open. "What is it?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Someone's inside," I hissed, pointing toward the window. We crept toward the doorway, hearts hammering, and that's when I saw them. The same two men from earlier. They rifled through drawers and cabinets with a frightening precision, like they had done this 100 times before. My stomach churned. Their faces were partially hidden in the dim light, but their intentions were clear. "Dylan, we need to get out," I said, voice trembling. He nodded. We moved slowly to the back door, careful not to make a sound. Each step felt deafening, the wooden floorboards groaning under the weight of our panic. Just as we reached the door, one of the men spotted us. "Hey, stop!" he shouted, and my heart leapt into my throat. We bolted down the driveway, adrenaline coursing through every limb. I could hear Dylan shouting for help behind me, our voices carrying through the quiet suburban night. Miraculously, a patrol car was driving down the street. Its headlights cut through the dark like swords, illuminating the two men. Officers leapt out, tackling one while the other fled into the shadows. Shaking, we huddled in Dylan's room, locking the door behind us. The night had transformed from playful freedom into pure terror in a matter of hours. I couldn't stop imagining the worst. What if we hadn't heard the footsteps? What if they had cornered us in the living room? By morning, Dylan's parents returned, oblivious to how close we had come to real danger. I tried to explain, but my words faltered, tangled with the lingering fear still lodged in my chest. The police later confirmed our suspicions. The men had been scoping the neighborhood, noting which homes lacked attentive adults. I had never felt more vulnerable, more aware of the thin veil of safety that adults provide. Even days later, shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, and unfamiliar cars triggered a jolt of panic in me. Sleepovers lost their magic. I became hyper-aware of every knock, every creak, every whisper in the night. In the weeks following, I replayed the night in my head repeatedly, analyzing every detail. The police were kind, but vague. Sometimes, luck is as much a part of survival as preparation. I realized that danger rarely announces itself with fireworks or dramatic gestures. It creeps in subtly, disguised as ordinary people performing ordinary tasks. I began carrying a flashlight when walking to a friend's house, double-checking locks and memorizing escape routes. My awareness didn't just keep me alert. It gave me a strange sense of control, a way to cope with the lingering anxiety. I learned that vigilance isn't paranoia. It's a survival tool, a skill that can keep you alive in moments when luck runs thin. Years later, I still carry the memory of that night. I walk with my head up, observing my surroundings, trusting instincts that had saved me more than once. Dylan and I joke about the sleepover now, but the lesson remains. Danger doesn't always wear a mask, and even safe places can be vulnerable. The men never returned, but the terror they left behind shaped how I see the world. I respect boundaries, question oddities, and never underestimate the subtle signs of trouble. That night taught me more about awareness, courage, and survival than any class or warning ever could. It's a lesson I carry forward, quiet but permanent. Vigilance is never optional, and sometimes the smallest instincts can save your life. Trust your instincts, remain aware of your surroundings, and remember that safety is a responsibility, not a given. Danger often hides in plain sight, and preparation can make all the difference. I had always been the kind of kid who liked predictability. Harbor Pines, Michigan was a quiet town, the sort of place where neighbors waved from their porches, dogs roamed the streets without leashes, and nothing much ever happened. So when my friend Logan invited me over for a weekend sleepover at his house, I felt a thrill of excitement, mixed with an undercurrent of nervousness. Logan's home at 112 Cedarbrook Drive was imposing for a 13-year-old's imagination. 2 stories with large windows, a backyard that sloped into a small wooded area, and a driveway that angled into the street. It felt like a fort in itself, full of secrets and possibilities. Logan's parents were out attending a wedding, leaving him and me with his older brother Connor, 18, who was usually glued to his computer. Connor had an air of detached maturity, the kind of presence that made me feel both safe and insignificant at the same time. I knew the sleepover would be fun, but I couldn't shake a flicker of apprehension about being alone with Logan without our parents around. We began the night building pillow forts in the living room, draping blankets over chairs and couches, creating a dim, cozy cave where we could eat pizza and play video games. The sun set in streaks of orange behind the horizon, and crickets began their distant chorus. Logan laughed freely, oblivious to the tiny knot of anxiety in my stomach. Around 11:10 p.m. I slipped into the kitchen to grab a soda, and that's when I noticed movement through the sliding glass door. A figure stood just beyond the edge of the backyard, obscured by shadows. My heart jumped. "Logan, is that—" I whispered, freezing in place. He followed my gaze, eyes widening. "I don't know. Maybe it's someone walking by," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The figure didn't move like a passerby. He stood still just beyond the reach of our porch light. Even in the dark, I could tell he was a man, probably in his late 30s, wearing a hoodie that obscured most of his face. My stomach twisted as I realized he was watching us, lingering like a predator who had known exactly where we were. I rushed to Connor's room, whispering frantically, "There's someone outside, near the window." Connor glanced up from his computer, annoyance creasing his face. "Relax, it's probably a neighbor or a lost jogger. Go back to bed." But we didn't move. The man was still there, now pacing slowly, stopping occasionally to peer in as if testing the glass. My hands shook. Logan and I exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. We both knew this was not a casual passerby. Minutes stretched into eternity. Every shadow from the trees outside seemed alive, shifting and swaying as though carrying the man's intentions with them. I couldn't breathe properly. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint click of Connor's keyboard, and the distant call of a night bird were deafening in their normalcy. Then came the first knock on the sliding door. Light, almost tentative, but deliberate enough to pierce the veil of calm we had tried to maintain. I could feel the heat rise in my chest as Logan and I scrambled to find our phones. 911, I whispered, trembling. "We need help. There's a man outside." The operator's voice was calm, almost soothing, but it didn't fully reach me. "Stay inside, lock all doors, and remain quiet. Officers are on the way." Meanwhile, The man shifted closer to the glass, crouching slightly, and I glimpsed a faint metallic shine in his hand. My pulse raced uncontrollably. This wasn't random curiosity. He was planning something, and we were directly in his line of vision. Connor finally emerged from his room, noticing our terror. "What's going on?" he demanded, voice steady but alert. "There's a man outside. He's watching us," I stammered. Connor grabbed the baseball bat from the closet and moved toward the back door with deliberate caution. I clutched Logan's arm, feeling the weight of fear and relief simultaneously. Time slowed to a crawl. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the house, every flicker of the porch light seemed amplified into a potential threat. We huddled near the couch, whispering in fragments, our words bouncing off the walls in shared terror. "Do you think he'll come in?" Logan asked, his voice small. "I don't know," I replied, my throat tight. "Just stay out of sight. Don't make a sound." Outside, the man moved unpredictably, testing the glass, crouching, standing, pausing. It felt as if he had studied the house in advance, memorizing entry points, noting weaknesses, waiting for a single mistake. My imagination ran wild, envisioning the worst-case scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. Finally, distant sirens pierced the night, signaling help was on the way. The man was gone by the time police arrived. Officers confirmed he had likely been lurking in the wooded area nearby, leaving only faint traces, broken branches and a wet patch of grass. The rest of the night was spent in Logan's bedroom, locked and silent except for the occasional whisper and jump at every noise. The fear didn't dissipate when the police left. It lingered, embedded in the walls, the shadows, and the stillness of the night. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every car on the street, every figure passing by the edge of the yard, triggered a spike of panic. Even familiar streets felt unfamiliar, and ordinary nights carried a quiet tension that wasn't there before. Years later, I drive past Cedarbrook Drive, and the memory still tightens my chest. That night taught me more than any lecture about safety ever could. Danger often hides in plain sight, silent and patient, waiting for the quietest moment to strike. I learned to trust instincts, to observe the small signs of unease, and to never take safety for granted, even in a familiar suburban neighborhood. Logan and I survived that night by noticing what felt wrong, acting quickly, and calling for help. Sometimes, fear isn't a story. It's a reality, lingering long after the night ends, shaping how we move, how we act, and how we protect ourselves. Vigilance, awareness, and courage are lessons that stick far longer than temporary relief. Trust your instincts, stay aware of your surroundings, and never underestimate the quiet dangers that can hide in familiar places. Awareness can make all the difference between safety and vulnerability. I had been counting down the days to my 14th birthday for weeks. Riverside Bay, California was usually calm and uneventful, but this year felt different. My best friend Sophie had invited me to a sleepover at her house on 76 Willow Lane, and she promised it would be unforgettable. Her parents were traveling for work, leaving her and her older brother Ethan, 19, in charge of the house. Ethan was a responsible but somewhat intimidating presence. His tall frame and quiet seriousness made him seem older than his years. Sophie's home had a partially renovated garage converted into a game room, which we had decided would be the perfect hideaway for our sleepover. The walls were bare, exposing wooden beams and hanging dim string lights that cast long shadows across the floor. I remember feeling a thrill walking into that space, both excited and a little unnerved. The garage had a slightly eerie atmosphere, like it belonged in a story, which only added to the sense of adventure. The evening began innocently. We decorated with balloons, ate cupcakes, and laughed over silly games. Eventually, we sat on beanbags and blankets, trading ghost stories and whispers. I could feel the excitement and nervousness building inside me. Sleepovers had always felt like a chance to escape the ordinary, but tonight, that sense of freedom was heightened by the isolation of the garage from the rest of the house. As the night deepened, the orange glow of the sunset faded, replaced by the soft hum of string lights and the occasional creak of the old garage floorboards. I felt a strange mix of comfort and unease, not knowing what to expect from the darkened corners of the room. It was that delicate balance of fear and excitement that made the sleepover feel alive. Then came the game suggestion that changed everything: hide and seek in the dark. Sophie grabbed a small flashlight and turned off the main garage lights. Shadows stretched and shifted across the room, creating hiding spots and secret corners. I crouched behind a stack of boxes, trying to control my breathing when I noticed something unusual. At the edge of the garage window, a shadow lingered. My stomach flipped. I froze, staring at the figure that barely moved. "Did you see that?" I whispered urgently to Sophie. Her eyes widened and she motioned for the others to stay silent. The shadow pressed closer, and I could make out the outline of a tall, broad-shouldered man standing completely still, watching us. My heart raced, and I realized this wasn't part of the game. Something about the stillness, the intent in that posture, felt wrong, like the shadow had been waiting. Panic began to creep in slowly but surely. One of the girls let out a small scream, and the shadow responded with a loud bang against the window frame. My chest tightened as Sophie grabbed my hand, urging us to move. I felt like my legs were made of lead, but fear pushed me forward. "Go! Go!" Sophie hissed, and we ran toward the garage door. Just as we reached it, Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs. "What's going on? Who's there?" His voice was firm, commanding attention, but I could hear the concern threading through it. The man froze for a second, startled, then retreated to the driveway. I caught a glimpse of a dark car parked outside the garage, engine idling. Before Ethan could reach the door, the figure climbed inside and sped away into the night, leaving only the lingering sense of menace behind. We called the police immediately, explaining every detail: the shadow, the banging, the car. The dispatcher's voice was calm, offering reassurances, but my body refused to relax. Officers arrived within 20 minutes, patrolling the neighborhood and taking statements. They found no fingerprints, no footprints, and no legible license plate on the car. It was as if the man had appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Sophie, Ethan, and I moved back into the main house under Ethan's watchful eye. The string lights and the familiar layout no longer brought comfort. Every creak of the floors, every rustle of leaves outside, made me jump. I realized that the night that began with laughter and games had transformed into a lesson about vulnerability and vigilance. In the following days, the police visited multiple times, questioning neighbors and checking security cameras. No one had seen the car leave clearly, and the shadowy figure remained anonymous. The officers explained that sometimes intruders appear and disappear without leaving a trace. The realization that someone had targeted us, specifically during a night we assumed was safe, sank heavily into my mind. Sophie's family decided to install motion sensor lights and surveillance cameras. Each click of a camera, each illumination of a yard light, was a reminder of the fragility of safety. Even small details, the way shadows moved, the position of trees, the distance of the driveway from the street, suddenly seemed significant. I began noticing patterns I hadn't before: the cars that lingered too long, the figures who paused just outside view, the faintest noise that hinted at movement. Fear had sharpened my senses, and while it was exhausting, it gave me a strange sense of empowerment. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night remained vivid. Every sleepover felt slightly riskier, every strange car on the street prompted scrutiny, and every shadow in my room seemed exaggerated by memory. I realized that safety wasn't automatic. It required awareness, preparation, and quick thinking. Sophie and I sometimes joked about the shadow, trying to laugh at our own terror, but the jokes never fully erased the tension. The experience changed how I approached my environment, my friends, and even my own instincts. I learned to trust subtle signs of danger, to act immediately, and to avoid assuming that a place is completely secure just because it feels familiar. Looking back, that birthday sleepover was more than a celebration. It was a lesson. The thrill of freedom, The fun of games and the laughter were all overshadowed by a harsh reminder that danger can be quiet, patient, and unseen. I learned the importance of vigilance, preparedness, and trusting my instincts. Even now, when I pass dimly lit garages or isolated driveways, I feel that twinge of unease. It is a reminder that safety is never guaranteed, and that awareness and caution are tools as important as any lock, light, or alarm. The shadow outside the garage didn't just scare me. It taught me to respect the unseen, to act quickly in the face of uncertainty, and to understand that vigilance can protect more than fear alone ever could. Safety is not a given. Even in familiar and seemingly secure spaces, vigilance, awareness, and trusting your instincts are crucial. Danger often appears quietly, but preparedness can make all the difference. I had always been careful about where I spent my weekends, but Maya's invitations were impossible to refuse. Hawthorne Ridge, Portland, Oregon, was a suburban town that seemed safe at first glance. Quiet streets, families walking dogs, and kids riding bikes. But beneath that calm, I'd learned to pay attention to details. Maya lived at 52 Evergreen Street, a neat two-story house with a small backyard and an open-plan living room. Her parents were at a conference that weekend, leaving her and her older brother Jared, 20, in charge. Jared was usually calm and friendly, but he had a tendency to disappear into his room for hours, leaving us unsupervised. Maya assured me it would be fun: pizza, movies, and games. I trusted her judgment, but a flicker of unease had followed me all afternoon. There was something in the way the quiet fell over her house when Jared wasn't around, a softness to the shadows that felt almost too still. The evening began normally. We ordered pizza and unpacked snacks, laughing and chatting as the aroma of cheese and tomato sauce filled the air. We played board games and watched movies, enjoying the carefree feel of a sleepover with no parents hovering nearby. Around 10:30 p.m., Maya suggested a thriller on her projector. The lights went out, the room dark except for the flickering light from the screen. I settled on the couch, blanket wrapped around me, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. Halfway through the movie, I noticed him. Caleb, Jared's friend, sitting silently in the corner of the room. He had been with us all evening, but now I realized he was staring at me intently, a strange grin on his face. My stomach dropped. Maya, is Caleb always like this?" I whispered. She shrugged nervously, eyes flicking toward him. "I guess he's usually quiet," she murmured. Every time I looked away and then back, he seemed closer, leaning forward, his gaze fixed on me. I tried to act casual, moving to sit next to Maya, but the sense of being observed only intensified. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating even, as if Caleb's presence pressed against my space. I tried to ignore the feeling, focusing on the movie, but my mind kept darting to the corner of the room. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't laugh at the jokes or respond to the movie. He just watched, patiently and deliberately, like he was measuring my reactions. "Do you feel weird about him?" I whispered to Maya during a commercial break. She frowned, biting her lip. "Maybe. I don't know, he's just quiet." Quiet didn't capture the feeling, though. It was the intensity behind his gaze, the slow, calculated way he leaned forward whenever I moved. The hair on my arms prickled, and a small, persistent fear began to creep up my spine. After the movie ended, we were getting ready for bed when the unease escalated. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water, hoping a little distance from him would calm my nerves. Instead, I found him sitting in the hallway, watching me silently. My heart skipped a beat. I quickly grabbed the water and retreated to Maya's room, locking the door behind me. We whispered about what to do, convincing ourselves that maybe it was just nerves or imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong, and yet, we had no one to confide in until the next morning. That night passed in tense silence. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, a distant car, even the hum of the refrigerator, felt magnified. I tried to focus on sleeping, but my thoughts kept returning to Caleb's grin, the way he lingered, and the oppressive sense of being watched. The next morning, a blocked number called my phone. Heavy breathing. My stomach dropped. I froze, realizing instantly that it was Caleb. The subtle fear from the night before crystallized into something tangible. He had been testing boundaries, finding a way to intimidate me without physically touching me. The realization was terrifying. Danger didn't always come from strangers outside. Sometimes it came from someone you already knew. Maya insisted we tell her parents when they returned. I hesitated, embarrassed and unsure how to explain the creeping terror. But eventually, the truth came out. Her parents were concerned, validating my instincts and promising to handle the situation carefully. Weeks later, Maya confided that Caleb had a history of inappropriate behavior toward younger girls. It was a chilling confirmation that my gut had been right. I had felt the subtle signs, the leaning forward, the grin, the lingering presence, and had recognized danger before it fully revealed itself. That sleepover changed how I interacted with people. I became hyper-aware of intentions, subtle behaviors, and how someone's presence could affect my comfort and safety. Every new acquaintance, every friend of a friend required a mental assessment, a reading of body language and patterns. It was exhausting but necessary. Even simple gestures like standing too close or breathing too heavily could now trigger a memory of that night. The sense of unease had not faded entirely. It had become a tool, sharpening my instincts and teaching me to trust myself above assumptions of safety. Looking back, that weekend at Evergreen Street was more than just an unnerving sleepover. It was a lesson. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind friendly faces, slipping in quietly, testing boundaries until fear is established. My instincts had saved me from escalating harm, and recognizing them early was crucial. I learned to trust subtle signs, to respect my own discomfort, and to act decisively even when no one else notices. Awareness became a shield, vigilance a necessity, and confidence in reading situations an invaluable skill. Even today, when someone lingers too long in my personal space or calls from an unknown number, my mind flashes back to Caleb's grin, his silent observation, and the suffocating tension of that night. It's a memory I carry not to frighten myself, but to remind me. Awareness is protection. Danger doesn't always come from strangers. Trust your instincts, notice subtle signs of discomfort, and never dismiss the unease you feel around others, even among friends or acquaintances. Awareness can protect far more than ignorance ever could. I had always been drawn to old houses, the way they creaked and groaned as if whispering their histories, the smell of aged wood and forgotten memories. Callie's home at 34 Elm Street in Harrington Falls, New Hampshire, was exactly that kind of house. It was sprawling with narrow hallways, tall windows, and an attic that had been left untouched for years. I was 15, spending a weekend sleepover with Callie while her parents visited relatives. Her younger brother Owen, 12, was tagging along, but he was more interested in video games than any adventure I had in mind. The evening began innocently enough: popcorn, board games, and some ghost stories we told in whispers. Callie's house had a charm that made it feel cozy, yet the shadows cast by the antique furniture and tall bookshelves gave it a slightly eerie edge. I remember thinking that the creaking floors and distant noises added a thrilling undertone, perfect for a sleepover that promised a bit of adventure. By 10 p.m., we decided to explore the attic. It had always fascinated me. Dusty boxes, forgotten furniture, and old family photos stacked along the walls. Armed with a flashlight, Callie and I tiptoed upstairs, giggling as we tried to be quiet, careful not to wake Owen. The attic smelled of must and old fabric, and every beam of light cast long, shifting shadows that seemed to stretch in impossible ways. We started exploring the stacks, pulling out old hats, scarves, and photo albums. Callie found a small, dusty camera on a shelf. "Let's take some silly photos," she whispered, her eyes shining with excitement. We posed with ridiculous hats and scarves, laughing as we snapped picture after picture. But when we reviewed the photos, my stomach dropped. In several shots, a blurry figure appeared behind us. Too tall to be Owen, its features obscured by shadow, its posture unnaturally still. I froze. Did you see that? I whispered. Callie's hand gripped the flashlight tightly. I don't know. Maybe it's just a trick of the camera, she said shakily. But instinctively I knew it wasn't. Something, or someone, had been there while we posed, and the thought made my heart pound. At first I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a double exposure, or an old reflection. But then came the sound. Soft footsteps, shuffling across the attic floor. I spun the flashlight around, its beam cutting through dust-filled air, but the space seemed empty. Panic started to rise. "We need to get out, now," I whispered to Callie. We crept toward the attic stairs, the wooden steps groaning under our weight. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward us. When we reached the top, I glanced back, half expecting the figure to appear behind us. Nothing. Yet the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Back in the living room, we tried to calm down, but every creak of the floors, every rustle of the wind outside, made us jump. I found myself staring at every dark corner, imagining the tall, blurry figure lurking there. The fear was subtle at first, a creeping unease, but it quickly grew into a tight knot in my chest that wouldn't loosen. The next morning, Callie's mom returned. Trembling, we showed her the photos. She inspected the camera carefully, but the blurry images had vanished. Only our memories and unease remained. "Maybe it's just old film or a malfunction," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I didn't feel reassured. Something had been there. Months later, I saw an old photo from Callie's childhood birthday party. In the background, partially hidden behind a doorway, stood a tall figure, eerily similar to the one in the attic. My stomach sank. This wasn't a random trick. Someone had been observing Callie and her friends for years. The thought that a stranger had silently watched children over time made my blood run cold. That sleepover left a lasting impression. I became acutely aware of ordinary places, the attic, the basement, even quiet corners of familiar rooms. I realized that danger doesn't always announce itself. It can lurk quietly, behind doors, behind shadows, and behind things that seem harmless. Callie and I avoided the attic for a long time, but the curiosity never fully went away. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at corners, noticing how shadows stretched, how shapes seemed to move when no one was there. Fear had sharpened my senses, taught me to notice the subtle signs, and forced me to respect the unknown. Looking back, that weekend at 34 Elm Street taught me more than caution. It taught me vigilance. The thrill of exploring the attic came with a stark reminder. Curiosity can be exciting, but it can also expose hidden dangers. Awareness, instinct, and careful observation became my tools, lessons I carried into every home, every sleepover, every seemingly safe situation. Even today, whenever I enter an attic or see an old camera lying around, I feel that creeping dread, that sense of eyes watching, silent and unseen. It's not fear without purpose, it's a reminder to respect the unseen and trust intuition. Danger isn't always obvious. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, waiting for the quietest moments to reveal itself. Danger can hide in ordinary places, often unnoticed. Curiosity is natural, but vigilance, awareness, and trusting your instincts are the best defenses against hidden threats. I had always loved staying over at my cousin Riley's house. It was large and quiet, with tall oak trees lining the driveway, a backyard that seemed to stretch forever, and an old cellar hidden near the garage. At 14, sleepovers felt like small adventures, chances to test independence while sharing secrets and late-night laughter. But that weekend in April, something about the house felt different. Riley's parents were out at a charity gala, leaving Riley and his younger sister, Emma, 10, at home. I arrived around 6 p.m., greeted by the familiar smell of Riley's kitchen, baking cookies earlier in the day, and the sound of Emma playing quietly in her room. We settled into the living room, built a blanket fort, played video games, and snacked on chips and candy. The night seemed perfect. By 10 p.m., Riley suggested we explore the backyard. Emma stayed behind, tired from the day's activities. The backyard, bathed in the faint glow of a single porch light, looked peaceful but strangely quiet. My eyes were drawn to the heavy wooden cellar door near the garage. Riley had always been vague about it, warning me never to explore it alone. "Don't go down there," Riley murmured, a note of unease in his voice. But curiosity is a powerful thing at 14. I approached the door, flashlight in hand, and peeked inside. Stacked crates, old gardening tools, and dust-covered boxes greeted me. It seemed empty. We laughed nervously, joking about ghosts and burglars, though a shiver ran down my spine. Then the first sound came, soft scratching from deep within the cellar. It was subtle at first, like a rat moving behind the crates. But then the door creaked open wider, on its own. My heart skipped. A shadowy figure crouched in the corner, watching. "Riley, who is that?" I whispered, voice shaking. Riley's face drained of color. I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't even notice it before." The figure stayed still, hidden by darkness. Every instinct screamed at us to run. I grabbed Riley's arm, and we sprinted toward the house, screaming for Emma. Panic flooded me. Who had been living there? How long had they been watching? That night, the cozy sleepover felt replaced by dread, the unknown pressing in from the shadows. We locked every door and called 911, trying to calm our shaking hands as the dispatcher's voice guided us. "Stay inside, keep the lights on, and don't approach the cellar," she said. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and I could still hear faint echoes from the cellar. Creaks, scuffs, the ghostly hint of movement. Minutes later, the police arrived. Officers moved cautiously through the yard, flashlights cutting through the dark. They opened the cellar and revealed the unimaginable. Makeshift bedding, empty bottles, and scattered belongings. Someone had been living there, hidden, unnoticed, probably for weeks. My stomach churned. This wasn't a prank or a story from a movie. It was real. I remember the officer's expression, a mixture of concern and disbelief as he told us that the stranger was apprehended shortly after the investigation. But the damage was done. Even with safety restored, the idea that someone had been so close, watching our every move without us knowing, made the house feel unsafe. Riley and I stayed in the living room for hours, recounting every sound, every shadow. Emma slept quietly, unaware of the intrusion, but Riley and I couldn't stop replaying the moment we had seen the figure crouched in the corner. Every detail, every sound, was etched into my memory. The following weeks were difficult. Riley's parents installed new locks, motion sensors, and cameras, but I couldn't shake the feeling of invasion. Even during the day, I felt uneasy in the backyard. Every shadow, every rustle in the trees, reminded me of the stranger who had hidden in the cellar. Sleepovers became tense. I checked every corner, peeked behind doors, and double-locked rooms before feeling remotely safe. The experience had taught me that danger doesn't always announce itself. It can hide quietly in the corners of our homes, in places we assume are mundane or secure. Months later, I would sometimes drive past 88 Oakwood Drive and feel a knot in my stomach. The image of the crouched shadow, the scratching noises, and the sudden terror stayed with me. I realized that the fear was not just about the figure itself, but about how easily normal spaces could conceal threats. It also changed the way I interacted with my surroundings. I became more observant, cautious, and aware of details others might dismiss. I started trusting my instincts more, learning that subtle unease is often a warning sign that should not be ignored. Looking back, that sleepover taught me a hard but essential lesson. Safety is fragile, and danger can exist even in familiar places. Curiosity is natural, but awareness and vigilance are necessary to protect oneself. The cellar had been a hidden world of fear, a reminder that the ordinary can hide the extraordinary and the unknown. Even now, when I see an old cellar, basement, or shadowy corner, I remember that night in Maplewood. I feel the adrenaline, the fear, and the awareness that comes from facing the unexpected. Danger may be silent and unseen, but preparation, instinct, and caution can make all the difference. Danger can exist even in familiar and seemingly safe spaces. Trust your instincts, stay aware, and never underestimate subtle signs of unease. Vigilance is key to protecting yourself from hidden threats.